The silence was the first lie. It wasn't an absence of sound, but a physical presence. A thick, smothering blanket woven from vacuum and dread. It pressed against the exterior of Kael's helmet, a counter-pressure to the whisper of the suit's recycler and the frantic, unsteady drumbeat of his own heart. Out here, on the lunar surface, sound was a memory, a ghost in the machine of the mind. Yet the ruin of the endeavor screamed. It was a subsonic, bone-deep thrum of violation, a story of energies so profound and wrong that they had permanently warped the very fabric of the space it occupied. Kael kept his breathing level, a discipline drilled into him at an academy he now despised. In, hold for 3, out for 5. Conserve oxygen. Conserve your nerve. The motion was automatic, a physiological metronome against the rising chaos of the scene. The battleship was a leviathan thrown up on a dead shore, its spine broken across the crater's edge. Earthlight, cold and clinical, bathed the wreckage in a ghostly blue, catching on the fractal planes of the crystalline growths that infested its hull. They weren't just on the ship, they were of it, seeming to have erupted from the armor plating like some grotesque mineral disease. They pulsed with a faint internal luminescence, a soft violet that was hypnotically beautiful and utterly terrifying. It was the color of a deep space nebula, of a poison dart frog, of death masquerading as life. Vitals check, he subvocalized, his voice a flat, dry thing in his own ears. The command was a reflex, the officer he used to be taking the reins from the salvager he had become. Sloane Green. Her voice came back, clipped and professional. He could picture her behind him, her gaze not on the macro horror of the wreck, but on the micro details, her medic's mind already dissecting, analyzing, categorizing the impossible phenomenon before them. Heart rate elevated, but within acceptable combat parameters. Respiration steady. A pause. Then, softer. Jax is unstable. Kael turned his head slowly, the motion syrupy in the low gravity. Jax was a pale statue in the earth glow, his arms wrapped around himself, as if to hold his very atoms together. His breath was a ragged, percussive static over the comms, a counterpoint to Kael's controlled rhythm. The kid's helmet was canted towards the wreck, but Kael knew he wasn't seeing it with his eyes. He was feeling it, tasting it on some psychic tongue Kael couldn't begin to comprehend. Jax, Kael said, pitching his voice low, trying to find a frequency that might cut through the noise in the boy's head. Talk to me. What are you getting? Static, Jax whispered, the word dissolving into a shuddering gasp. No, not static. It's a signal with no message. A scream with no throat. It's broken. It's all broken. They sang a song and the song broke them. They sang a song. The phrase was meaningless. The babbling of a terrified mind pushed past its limits, but it sent a sliver of ice down Kael's spine. It felt ancient. He took a loping step towards the boy, the lunar dust puffing up around his boots in a slow motion cloud. He put a gauntleted hand on Jax's shoulder pauldron. The kid flinched, a full body tremor that vibrated through the rigid suit. "Focus on me, Jax." "On my voice," Kael commanded, the authority a comfortable, familiar weight. "Filter it out. It's just noise. A busted transmitter. Nothing more. A lie." The pressure of 1,000 atmospheres was nothing compared to the weight of one lie. He felt it settle on his soul, another layer of silt over the wreckage of his past. "It's not noise," Jax insisted, his voice cracking. "It's what's left after the noise." The echo in the empty room. Sloane moved up beside them, her movements economical and precise. His biometric feedback is a mess. Tachycardia, elevated cortisol. His brain is reacting as if it's experiencing a massive, sustained physical trauma. We need to get him out of proximity to that thing. We go in, we find the logs, we get out, Kael stated, turning his back on Jax. Though he kept the boy's vitals prominent on his HUD, it was a calculated cruelty. Show no weakness, give the fear no quarter. It was how he'd been trained. It was how he'd failed before. The Hegemony will want to know what happened to their billion-credit battleship. They'll want to know more about that rift. The answers are in there. And maybe, just maybe, something valuable enough to buy his way out of this recycled life. The salvager's hope dies last. He began a slow, deliberate traverse along the ship's mangled port side, his boots crunching softly in the gray dust. The scale of the vessel was obscene up close. A single armor plate was the size of a landing craft. The laser scoring that covered the hull wasn't the clean, surgical line of a Hegemony plasma cannon. It was jagged, chaotic, as if the ship had been clawed by something immeasurably vast. The crystalline growths followed these claw marks, clustered most thickly within the gouges, as if feeding on the ship's wounds. Whatever did this, it wasn't a fair fight, Sloane murmured, her voice a mix of clinical assessment and raw awe. The energy signatures required to breach this much composite armor. It's beyond our theoretical models. Kael didn't respond. He was searching. An officer looks for tactical advantage. A salvager looks for a way in. His eyes scanned the chaos of twisted metal and glittering crystal, looking for a seam, a fracture, a point of entry that wouldn't require a dedicated engineering team and a week of work. He found it near what was once a ventral missile battery. The entire housing had been torn away, leaving a ragged, gaping hole in the superstructure. The edges of the breach were curled back like peeled tin, and the telltale violet glow pulsed from within. "There," he pointed. "That's our door. It's unstable," Sloane countered immediately. "Look at the stress fractures radiating from the aperture. The whole section could collapse. The whole ship could sublimate into exotic matter at any second." Kael shot back, his patience thinning. "We're well past stable, Jax. Stay tight." "Sloane on me." He unslung the multi-tool from his back, the plasma cutter's housing feeling solid, and real in his gloved hands. It was a comfort, a tool with a single understandable purpose in a situation that defied all understanding. The approach to the breach was a nightmare landscape. Twisted conduits, thick as a man's torso, snaked out from the ship's guts, coated in the same crystalline shell. The ground was littered with fragments of the hull, some small as his fist, others large as his submersible had been. The silence pressed in again, heavier now, burdened by the proximity of the dead thing. He reached the edge of the hole and peered into the darkness. Emergency lights were dead. The only illumination came from the pulsing of the crystals that coated the inner surfaces, casting shifting, violet shadows that played tricks on the eyes. The air that should have been inside was long gone, vented into the void. It was a tomb, a massive, technologically advanced, floating tomb. The smell hit him even through his suit's filtration system. It wasn't a physical scent, not yet, but a phantom signal registered by his implants, a spike in airborne particulates, complex proteins, and a specific ozone signature he'd only ever encountered once before, on a training simulation for exotic weapon exposure. It was the smell of flash-sterilized air and cooked metal, of energy discharged on a scale that atomized organic matter. It was the smell of a ghost. "Setting the cutter," he announced, kneeling and bracing the tool against a jagged spar of metal. He had to clear a path, slice away a hanging sheet of armor that partially blocked the way. "Jax, how are you doing?" The song, Jax stammered, his voice barely a whisper. "It's stronger in there. It's hungry." "Understood," Kael said, the word tasting like ash. He squeezed the trigger. A brilliant blue-white needle of plasma hissed into existence, silently incinerating the regolith. Where it touched down, he brought the beam to the edge of the metal sheet. There was no sound, only an intense, localized shimmer as the plasma vaporized the alloy, turning solid armor into incandescent gas. The process was slow, deliberate. He had to guide the cutting head with painstaking precision, the vibration traveling up his arms. Time seemed to stretch. Each millimeter of the cut, a lifetime. The violet light from within the ship seemed to pulse in time with his heartbeat. The dead vessel and the living man caught in a terrible, shared rhythm. His focus narrowed to the bead of molten metal, the play of light on his visor, the steady hum of his suit's power pack. It was a form of meditation, a way to keep the sheer, overwhelming wrongness of this place at bay. The sheet finally gave way, peeling back with a silent, languid grace in the low gravity before clanging noiselessly against the larger hull. The way was clear. The gaping maw of the ship waited, its throat lined with glittering purple shards. "Sloane, you're on point," he ordered. "Medical, scan everything. I want to know what this crystal is, what it's doing. Jax, you're with me. Call out if the feeling changes. Any shift, any spike. You tell me. You're our early warning system." He saw Sloane nod in his peripheral vision before she moved into the breach. her weapon held at a low ready. She was all fluid efficiency, a professional moving into a known danger zone. But this wasn't known. This was something else entirely. Kael pushed Jax forward gently. The boy moved like a sleepwalker, his limbs stiff and uncoordinated. Kael followed them in, his own rifle up, the back of his neck prickling. The moment he crossed the threshold, the universe shifted. The phantom smell became real. His suit's chemical sensors screamed, flashing amber warnings across his HUD. Unidentified biological contaminant. Unidentified complex proteins. Caution. Corrosive environment. It was the scent of a charnel house and a high-voltage substation, combined acrid ozone, scorched metal, and an underlying, sickly sweet odor of decay that was so profound, it felt like it was coating his tongue. The silence was gone. In its place was a low, pervasive hum. It wasn't auditory, not in the traditional sense. It resonated through the soles of his boots, up his legs, vibrating in his teeth and his bones. It felt like standing too close to a colossal, impossibly powerful engine, and he knew, with a certainty that defied logic, that the hum was coming from the crystals themselves. They were alive, or they were the byproduct of something that was. They were in a secondary service corridor. Wires and conduits, thick and inert, lined the walls, but everything was coated in the crystalline growth. It wasn't just a surface layer. It grew in thick, complex lattices, like coral, choking the passage. It covered consoles, bulkheads, even the recessed lighting strips in the ceiling, which now glowed with that same diseased violet light. The air, though unbreathable, was thick with floating motes of the stuff, a glittering purple dust that swirled in the currents of their movement. "My God," Sloane breathed, her voice tight with a mixture of horror and scientific fascination. She ran a hand over a section of the crystal, her suit's diagnostic sensors whirring. "The composition is impossible. It's a silicon-based matrix, but it's exhibiting properties of organic cellular respiration. It's metabolizing the ship's alloys. It's eating the Endeavor." Kael swept his light down the corridor. It was a long, straight passage, but visibility was limited by the swirling dust and the strange, non-Euclidean angles of the crystal formations. It was like walking through the digestive tract of some alien god. His footfalls were unnervingly loud now, the magnetic soles of his boots clanking against the metal deck where it wasn't covered by the growth. And then he saw it. Half subsumed by a large crystalline cluster was a body, or what was left of one. It was a hegemony crewman in a standard ship suit. The fabric shredded and torn. The crystal had grown over him, through him. Shards erupted from his chest cavity. His limbs were encased in it, and his helmet's visor was shattered, revealing a face frozen in a silent scream. But the crystal that had consumed his face pulsed with a brighter, more insistent light than the rest. It glowed in time with the hum that vibrated through the deck. Sloane made a choked sound. "Neural integration," she whispered, taking a step closer before stopping herself. The crystal It seems to concentrate around sources of high bioelectrical energy. The nervous system, the brain, it's singing, Jax gasped, pointing a trembling finger at the dead man. That's one of them, one of the singers. He's still broadcasting. Kael felt a cold knot of dread tighten in his stomach. He raised his rifle, the weapon suddenly feeling flimsy and useless. The dead man wasn't a casualty of the battle. He was a component, a battery, an amplifier for that terrible, silent song. He forced himself to move forward, to examine the corpse with the detached eye of an officer assessing a threat. The crewman's sidearm was still holstered. His hands were empty. He hadn't been fighting, he had been consumed. They continued down the corridor, a slow, funereal procession. Every few meters, there was another body. Each one in a similar state. Some were fused to the walls, becoming part of the ship's grotesque new architecture. Others were clustered together, their crystalline forms melding into a single pulsing sculpture of agony. This wasn't the aftermath of a battle. It was a harvest. The bridge should be forward, 2 decks up, Kael said, his voice a strained rasp. He was forcing the words out, forcing a mission objective into the heart of the madness. It was all he had left. Structure, purpose, anything to keep from looking too closely at the silent, screaming faces in the crystal. Kael. Sloane's voice was sharp, cutting through his fragile focus. Wait, look here. She was crouched by another body, this one, an officer judging by the insignia, still visible on the tattered remains of his collar. He was different from the others. He wasn't encased in the crystal. He was lying beside a large growth, his body strangely untouched. But the bulkhead next to his head was smeared with a dark, frozen spray of blood and tissue. A standard issue Hegemony service pistol was clutched in his gloved hand. The barrel pointed towards his own helmet. Suicide. He hadn't been taken by the crystals. He had chosen this. He had looked at what was happening to his crew, felt the change in his own mind, heard the beginning of that hungry song, and made a choice. He had opted for the clean, finite oblivion of a bullet over the endless, screaming chorus of the crystal. The implications of that act were more terrifying than 1,000 consumed bodies. It meant there was a moment of clarity. A moment when you knew you were being assimilated, your very consciousness being overwritten, turned into a biological transmitter for an alien signal. A moment to choose. Jax let out a low moan and sank to his knees. His hands pressed to the sides of his helmet. So loud, he sobbed. It's so loud now. He was afraid. He was so afraid of the song. Kael stood frozen, staring at the dead officer. The man's sacrifice was a message. A warning. This thing, this crystal, this song, it didn't just kill you. It used you. It repurposed you. It was a war not for territory or resources, but for the territory of the soul itself. And some wars, he realized with a chilling, absolute certainty, were fought to be lost. This man hadn't lost. He had forced a stalemate on his own terms. It was the only victory available to him. The weight of that final, desperate act of defiance settled over Kael, a pressure far greater than any ocean.